Welcome to the DragonLance Saga Gaming SAGA System episode. This is the second episode in the Saga Book of the Fifth Age series. It is Lenara's Guildember the 16th. My name is Adam, and I'm starting the SAGA System Dragonlance 5th Age game next weekend, so I thought it'd be fun to read the core rules aloud and discuss them with a live audience. I would like to take a moment and thank the members of this channel, and invite you to consider becoming a member by visiting the links in the description below, and remind you can always pick up Dragonlance gaming materials using another link in the description below. We left off on Chapter 2, so let's pick up there as well. Indeed, my stories are true, child. The old man looked directly at the woman and her tall escort. Ask these two. They carry such stories in their hearts. Do you? The boy turned to the woman eagerly. Can you tell me a story? Goldmoon and Riverwind encounter Fizzban and a child, dragons of autumn twilight. The two most important qualities to the Dragonlance 5th Age game are character and story. You know what I want to do really quick? I want to make sure my volume levels are right, because I have this creeping suspicion that they changed. I just did this feed this way. They did. Okay, we should be good now. The previous chapter taught players how to create the most important characters, the heroes. This chapter tells the narrator how to construct the story. Fifth Age adventures are tales of epic quests, great villains, and battles against overwhelming odds. In addition to making each adventure the hero undertakes different from the last, narrators must make the game challenging and entertaining. They should care about encouraging the players and making sure they have fun. To accomplish these goals, a narrator must understand how to craft and conduct Dragonlance adventures. Creating adventures. In many ways, creating game adventures is like writing other types of fiction. Many traits of a good novel, short story, or film script characterize a fine adventure as well. For instance, an adventure's settings, characters, and events must be interesting, unique, and vividly described, just like in a good story. However, adventures must possess other qualities too. While an author can mandate the actions of his characters, a narrator can never be sure exactly how players will react to a given situation. Therefore, a good adventure must be more fluid than other types of fiction. Its plot should offer heroes many different options for action. A new adventure in an ongoing game should derive from a link to past events and foreshadow future ones. A narrator should include in his adventure elements that appeal to the diverse tastes of his players. Some people like to play heroes who charge into battle with swords swinging, while others prefer to have their heroes sneak around and solve riddles. It's best to try to appeal to everyone at least a little. A good adventure begins and ends on an exciting note. The former to grab players' attention, and the latter to give them a grand finale that leaves them breathless. The outcome of the adventure must depend on the actions of the heroes, not other characters alone. The best adventures change both the world and the heroes themselves in some way. When this is done right, the players will have stories to tell for years to come. The core of any adventure, of course, is the hero's goal. Perhaps they must free a captured elf senator from the foul Knights of Tekesis, or recover a lost dragonlance from the ruins of a crumbling tower. Whatever the premise of the adventure, the narrator must define it clearly, making it readily apparent to players. No one enjoys the game when the heroes only wander around, unable to figure out what they should be trying to accomplish. This is not to say that a good adventure plot must be completely linear. Far from it. A good story will always have subplots, twists, and turns to keep the heroes and players on their toes. The important thing, however, is to make sure that these subplots don't overshadow the main storyline. Selecting the villain. Of course, a story would not get far without a worthy foe to oppose the heroes. Two general categories of villains are masters and minions. The latter, lesser villains, such as a pack of thieves or a patrolling band of draconians, can ably serve as antagonists in most adventures. A narrator can introduce minions to challenge a relatively inexperienced group of heroes or to spice up an otherwise slow portion of the adventure. Sometimes a minion actually is doing the bidding of a greater monster, which, in turn, could be the minion of an even greater foe. Masters are the nefarious leaders whose plot to destroy the heroes, dominate the land, and otherwise crush whoever they must to achieve their goals. Ansalon's ruling evil dragons qualify as masters, as does Miriela Abrena, commander of the Knights of Tekesis. Usually the heroes must complete several adventures before they meet the true master behind the evil that they have been combating. The final battle against a master should be a great climactic one, with the heroes emerging victorious only after a long struggle. Selecting villains that will challenge the heroes without overwhelming them is a real art. In order for an enemy, either a minion or a master, to be more than just a brief diversion, the narrator should consider the following criteria. Threat. A villain's ability to threaten a party of adventurers might be based strictly on his raw physical power. An ogre, though dim-witted, can prove quite dangerous. On force of numbers, 100 goblins is a threat, whereas 1 or 2 are not. Or on cleverness, a diabolical ruler or sorcerer might force the hero to outwit him. Reflections. A good villain, especially a master, teaches the heroes something about themselves, perhaps more than they wanted to know. Confronting such a fiend might show them they share a trait in common. They could fall into a trap of becoming just like their foe. This knowledge can give any hero a case of goosebumps. Mystery. Another important aspect in choosing a villain, either master or minion, is mystery. When the heroes of the Lance first faced Draconians, for instance, they were caught off guard by their strange appearance and powers. The encounter proves more memorable if the heroes don't know what to expect. Structuring a basic plot. An adventure is composed of acts and scenes. Each scene contains a plot element or challenge that the heroes must resolve before they can continue with the story. Some scenes involve combat, others rely on clever planning or puzzle solving, while still others constitute merely a break in the action to give the players a chance to talk over their options. A number of scenes taken together make up an act. In each act, the heroes take a significant step toward their ultimate goal. Once the narrator has established the adventure's premise and basic plot using the guidelines for a good adventure on the previous page, he should break it down into about 3 major sections or acts. Each represents one important step along the way to the hero's goal. Consider the following example. Sample plot outline. The premise of this short adventure is that the heroes are called upon to help defend the city of Salanthus from attack by marauding ogres, minions. Act 1. While riding with a merchant caravan out of Salanthus, the heroes fend off an ogre attack. The creatures take several prisoners, however. Act 2. Upon rescuing the prisoners, the heroes learn that the ogres plan to unite for a major raid on Salanthus. Act 3. The heroes return to warn the city watch and assist in the final battle against the ogre invaders. Next, the narrator should determine exactly what happens in each act by mapping out the series of events that heroes will most likely pursue as they move toward their goal. Each event gets its own scene. We return to our example. Act 1, Scene 1. A merchant hires the heroes to ride along with his caravan, guarding it from raiders. This scene is primarily one of role-playing. Scene 2. Shortly after the caravan leaves Salanthus, ogres attack it. This scene involves mainly combat. Scene 3. Whether or not the ogres meet defeat, they take a number of prisoners and the heroes must rescue. This scene gives the heroes a chance to recover from their wounds and plan an attack on the ogre camp. Act 2, Scene 1. The heroes raid the ogre camp, probably at night, and rescue the captives in the process. They learn that the ogres plan to join up with the other bands and launch a dawn attack on Salanthus. This scene offers heroes a combination of combat and stealth activity. Scene 2. Pursued by ogres, the heroes race back to Salanthus in the hopes of raising an alarm. And I'll get back to this in just a second. Along the way, they encounter one or more natural hazards, a raging river, brush fire, or the like, which they must overcome in order to reach the city. This problem-solving scene may involve combat if the heroes delay long enough for the ogres to catch up with them. Act 3. Scene 1. Reaching Salanthus, the heroes must persuade the captain of the guard to alert the watch and make ready to repel the ogres. This is a role-playing encounter. Scene 2. The heroes join the city's defenders in driving off the ogres. This combat encounter might include a one-on-one duel between the ogre chieftain and the leader of the heroes. So let's go back and look at this chart here. Introduction: heroes are in town resting after their last adventure. Scene 1 can lead to Scene 2, or it can lead to Scene 8, depending on the choices of the heroes. I think this is the biggest point that players need to really understand. Yeah, I agree, Figs Channel. Thanks for joining live, man. I don't go through this sort of diagram flow whenever I plan an adventure, but I do always have the basics of where I want the story to go and what I want to happen. If the characters go way off course, then I just riff. And ultimately, by riffing, you can lead them back to some semblance of where you wanted them to go in the first place without overtly railroading them. And that's really what this is all about, because ultimately they want it to get to the escape succeeds or the escape fails. Whether you do that from Scene 1 or Scene 2 through 8, you'll always end up at 8. And I think this is an important point for people to really remember and understand, is that playing a game, it's supposed to be fluid and storytelling based, not pushing people along. Yeah, Alba Witch. 96, not in... that was a mistake of mine. I had copied over my Dungeon Master's Guide reading notes, and I didn't fix that part of it. Fine-tuning the plot. With the basic plot in place and the major scenes determined, the narrator should next give thought to other possible actions the heroes might take. For example, what if they fail to fend off the ogre attacking the caravan? What if they refuse the job as caravan guards? Before playing, the narrator should create scenes to cover all of these possibilities. Once the narrator has designed all the scenes he might need, he should take a look at the storyline as a whole, keeping in mind the elements of a good adventure offered earlier. Looking at the sample adventure, for example, a narrator might note that the first scene seems rather dull. He decides to add an encounter in which the heroes witness an assault and can come to the aid of the victim, who happens to be a caravan owner. This fellow is so impressed with their fighting skill, he offers them a job. Beginning the adventure with a quick fight like this is a good deal more interesting and plausible than having a character walk up to the heroes and ask, "Anybody want a job?" Adding subplots. At this point, the story still seems too straightforward, so the narrator can give the adventure a few subplots. Again, he should remember not to let them overshadow the main storyline. For example, the narrator might decide to give the caravan master a beautiful daughter who becomes smitten with one of the heroes. If the hero returns her affections, a love interest can bloom. Should he spurn her, she might become dejected or spiteful. Another possible subplot might present the caravan master as a thief whose crimes are discovered only after the merchant train has left Salanthus. The populace, knowing that the heroes work for him, assume them to be thieves too. When they return to town, they'll have a hard time convincing the town watch to believe their story about the impending ogre attack. Pacing. When creating the adventure, it is vital to plan the flow of events carefully. Like a good book or film, the storyline should feature escalating action with a series of conflicts that lead to a final climax. However, narrators must take care to vary and pace their action. Even players who love combat scenes will quickly lose interest in a game consisting of nothing more than running around hitting draconians with swords. Narrators can inject other plot elements between combat scenes. Such breaks in the action have a function in the story. They allow heroes to tend their wounds, plan strategies, and otherwise catch their collective breath. Even successful action films like Raiders of the Lost Ark or Aliens incorporate breaks and pauses to pace the story. Of course, narrators should not hesitate to cut a restful scene short in the order to inject an element of surprise. Having a hobgoblin spring out of the woods when the heroes least expect it proves an excellent technique for capturing players' attention and can serve as a transition to the next scene. Campaigns. A campaign is a series of adventures linked by a common story thread. In some cases, the only recurring element throughout the campaign is that the same heroes appear game after game. In other campaigns, nested plots and intricate stories twist within and around each other to make the entire sequence feel like a single, never-ending story. Television series like Star Trek are good examples of the former, while soap operas present excellent examples of the latter. While designing each new story, the narrator should consider its place in the greater campaign. How can he link it to events from past adventures? What new tales might spin off from this one? Designing scenes. After planning the overall adventure, the narrator should go back and describe each scene in detail. The information included in a scene's description may vary, but published 5th Age Adventures will use a standard format. To see how a finished adventure uses these scenes descriptor formats described below, the narrator can look over Heroes of a New Age, the adventure in this box. Overview. The first section of a scene should quickly describe the event or challenge the scene presents and explain its purpose in the adventure. A narrator could get a good overview just by adding a bit more detail to one of the capsule scenes described in the same sample plot outline offered earlier. If the heroes opt to do something unexpected in the scene, the plot can stray from the direction established here. However, knowing what must happen during a scene to preserve the integrity of the adventure can help a narrator guide the players back on track. Getting started. The next section lists the special materials the narrator should have on hand, such as a particular character card, so he's not caught off guard during the play of the scene. First impressions. One of a narrator's biggest challenges is providing players with a brief but detailed descriptions of key settings that heroes encounter. So, to begin each new scene of play, the narrator should read the paragraph or two in the First Impressions section out loud. This text, printed in color, tells the player where the heroes are, what they see, and what is happening as the scene begins. It gives them the information they need to size up the situation and select a course of action. Blocks of text printed in color sometimes appear in other sections of the scene too. Narrators should read these descriptions aloud to their players when the heroes come to the proper point in the scene. The story continues. The heart of the scene described in some detail, the events only hinted at in the overview. This information, intended solely for the eyes of the narrator, explains what takes place at this point in the adventure. It reveals the behavior of important characters, offers tips on handling various possible reactions from the players, and provides contingencies for the most likely hero actions. This section is called The Story Begins in the first scene of the adventure, and The Story Ends in the final scene. Atmosphere. A narrator must convey the mood of each scene to players. The atmosphere section offers them ideas of making the scene seem more dramatic or exciting to the players through its pacing and tone. For example, it might suggest props, background music, or a particular style of speech to use when a certain character speaks to the heroes. It also might urge the narrator to pick up the tempo in a combat scene to reflect the frenzy of the fight. Actions. Heroes carry out a number of activities during a scene. Conducting everyday behavior and interacting with other characters rarely requires formal game actions, however. The heroes can carry out basic activities like eating breakfast automatically. In other cases, the outcome of an impromptu role-playing exchange between the heroes and a character determines the success of heroes' actions or activities. Therefore, the actions section of a scene describes only the most complex of important game actions, ones that require card play, as described in Chapter 3. Examples include searching for shelter or breaking down a door. Characters. Sometimes the Story Continues section mentions characters who could interact with the heroes during the events of a scene. The Characters section gives the narrator information about these figures, monsters, townsfolk, dragons, and so on. Some such individuals are described on the 18 character cards included in this box, while others are adventure-specific. To save the narrator the trouble of cross-referencing between pages, each scene in 5th Age Adventures includes a brief game description of all relevant characters who do not have cards. For instance, Saranja, Colonist female, adult, somber demeanor, champion, and you see the stats, damage, weapon, armor, and abilities. The character detail above begins by offering the figure's name and color, followed by her race, gender, age, demeanor, and reputation in italics. Like heroes, characters can have numeric scores and one-letter codes in each of 8 abilities. The second part of a character detail presents the figure's ability scores and codes. 5th Age Adventures abbreviate the ability names as follows: Agility AG, Dexterity DX, Endurance EN, Strength ST, Reason RE, Perception PE, Spirit SP, Presence PR. Monsters and minor characters are not as detailed as major characters and heroes, so they do not have all 8 ability scores. They use only the 4 pairs of related abilities in their character details: Coordination, Physique, Intellect, and Essence. If the character can use magic, his spell points are listed in parentheses after his reason score for sorcery, or his spirit score for mysticism. Details about magic appear in Chapter 5. Next, in a character detail comes the figure's damage and defense ratings, including weapon and armor types. Finally, it lists any unusual abilities the character may have, such as magic or use of a special attack. Outcome. The final section, the outcome, closes the scene. It tells the narrator where to turn next to continue the adventure, depending on the hero's actions. For instance, the outcome might tell the narrator to proceed to scene 2 if the heroes managed to defeat their foe, or to scene 3 if they lost the fight. Narrating a scene. Once the narrator has created the adventures and planned every scene, how exactly does one play? Orchestrating the role-playing of scene is one of the most important jobs of the narrator in the 5th Age game. To direct the play of each scene, the narrator must 1. Offer a short introductory description to set the scene, 2. Ask the players what their heroes want to do first in the scene, and 3. Resolve through card play or role-playing, or both, how well the hero's plans succeeded. Depending on the complexity of the scene, the narrator may have to repeat this sequence several times. Combat scenes require a few adjustments to the sequence as detailed in Chapter 4. Step 1. Describe the scene. Every scene begins with the narrator describing the situation in which the heroes find themselves. This description should be brief. Listening to a long narrative can get dull, but it must include enough information to help the players decide what their heroes want to do. A narrator should keep the following few points in mind to make the scene description exciting. Appeal to the senses. More than any other sense, players rely on sight. Therefore, scene descriptions must include a strong visual element, even if it's only that the heroes have entered a totally dark room. This does not mean, however, the scene description should ignore the other senses. Like sight, hearing almost constantly provides people with important information about their surroundings. Mentioning of sounds and their absence adds a great deal to a description. A wolf howls in the distance. The slow drip of water echoes off the walls of a cave. The rasp of a creature's breath sounds from just around the next corner. Whatever the scene, it is vital to mention what the heroes hear. Scientific evidence has shown that non-sensory input remains more firmly set in the brain than that of smell. If a narrator tells his players that a hero's den smells like a spice cabinet, everyone knows what he means. The fact that each player may have a different impression of exactly what a spice cabinet smells like is unimportant. Since of all the senses, smell evokes the greatest physical reaction in a person, narrators should always remember to mention what a place smells like. Finding out how something feels or tastes usually requires an effort from the heroes, though they might notice an unusual temperature or humidity level. So these sensory details seldom appear in an initial scene description. One way to use sensory information besides sight in a scene description is to focus on different senses in different scenes or parts of scenes. If one scene in a dank cave relies heavily on its smell, the narrator might later focus on the scene's cold feel or initially describe the next one in terms of its sounds. Sensory description should continue throughout the entire scene, too, as heroes attempt actions and respond to events. Personalize the description. A narrator can describe a scene even more effectively by tailoring it to the heroes involved. If he can bend some aspect of the description to appeal to a certain hero, the player will find himself drawn more deeply into the scene. For example, a narrator could describe a dark cave as being rather like the underground halls of Thorbarton, the kingdom where the dwarf character grew up. A patch of thick forest might remind a homesick elf of the Quillinesty woodland home he left behind. The Dusk or Dawn sourcebook offers plenty of appropriate location details. Never mandate heroes' actions. In scene descriptions, the narrator must take care not to describe what the heroes do. That's always up to the players. For example, he should never say, "You see a brilliant gem before you, glowing with cool blue light. Touching it, you discover that it is as cold as ice." This description requires the hero to touch the gem, something the players may not want them to do. In fact, if the fact that the gem is frigid is important to the scene, the narrator can alter the description to say the stone radiates an aura of cold the heroes can feel at a distance. In a similar vein, narrators must not mandate the hero's thoughts or deductions. A description can include impressions, such as mentions that the given place reminds the heroes of something, or that a staggering zombie fills them with revulsion. However, telling them that the zombie is undoubtedly the creature that has been killing the locals is going too far. Answer heroes' questions. In most cases, the narrator should conclude a scene description with a brief, informal question and answer session. This simply allows the players to make sure that they understand exactly what is going on around the heroes. For example, say a narrator tells the players that their heroes have encountered a sprawling garden in the tropical realm of Nordmar. Players might ask whether a certain type of flower grows there, or may want to know what condition the soil is in. The possible questions are endless and often contain good opportunities for role-playing. The narrator should take care to keep this question and answer period to a reasonable amount of time. When he feels the players have learned all they need to know, he should move on. In some cases, the narrator may not allow the players to ask questions. This is especially true when the scene's activity, such as combat, directs the hero's attentions in a particular direction. If a player really wants to answer in such a situation, the narrator should require his hero to spend some time looking around. Meanwhile, of course, potentially important things would continue to happen all around him. Step 2. What do you do? Once the narrator has presented the players with a description of their situation, he asks them each what their heroes wish to do first. To help players decide, the narrator should tell them about any factors that might limit a hero's options in the scene. Time available. Does the hero have enough time to accomplish what he intends to do? Each scene in an adventure may represent a different amount of game time. Combat scenes are fast and furious. They're over in a matter of minutes. In a less pressing situation, a hero may have more time to act. Narrators should let common sense determine exactly what a hero has time to do in a given scene. Training and experience. Consider the hero's background and abilities. If he is he even remotely capable of accomplishing what he hopes to do? To answer this question, the narrator should help players examine their hero's specific game details listed on their hero sheet. Are his relevant ability codes good enough to allow him to succeed? Or perhaps his high reputation rating implies that the hero has had time to learn a relevant skill. For example, a group of heroes is resting around a campfire after a fierce battle. One of them wishes to repair his armor, which is damaged during the fray. Clearly, this task clearly requires training in the maintenance of armor. However, the narrator notices that the hero has a poor ability code in endurance, the ability associated with the suit of helms and with armor use. Therefore, he doubts that the hero has enough training to even attempt the repairs. The hero would be wiser to ask someone with a better code to fix it. In the same situation, the player might point out that his hero is an experienced adventurer with a high reputation rating. Surely he has made minor repairs in his armor after dozens of battles over the years. In such a case, the narrator might allow the hero to attempt the repairs despite his poor ability code. Step 3. Resolve actions. Once a player has announced what his hero will do first in the scene, the narrator must determine whether the hero accomplishes the task. Success or failure may depend on any of a number of factors, including the play of cards, the difficulty of the desired act, and the needs of the story or campaign. In the Saga rules system, most of the things a player would want his hero to do are considered actions. In short, an action is a single task that a player wishes his hero to attempt. A narrator asks a player to perform an action if he decides the hero has a chance of succeeding at whatever he wants to do, but also has a chance of failing. Some common actions include picking a lock, attacking an enemy with a sword, casting a magical spell, or leaping across a yawning pit. In any of these cases, the narrator asks the player to attempt the action by playing a card or cards. Chapter 3 describes how to determine the success or failure of specific hero actions. Sometimes what the hero wants to do is so simple the narrator decides it involves no risk of failure at all. For example, say a hero wishes to open an unlocked chest that harbors no traps or enchantments. The task is so basic, the hero succeeds automatically. The narrator simply informs the player that his hero opens the chest. By the same token, some desired actions may be so difficult the hero has no chance of success at all. Say a player tells the narrator that his hero wants to try breaking down the castle gate before him with his bare hands. The narrator knows that this gate was built to withstand the mightiest battering ram the local goblins could devise, let alone one individual's assault. He simply tells the player his hero wasn't strong enough to do it. Heroes might try to address the challenge of a scene by role-playing instead of attempting actions. Perhaps they seek to win a local lord's support for their mission. In this case, the narrator portraying the lord listens to the players make their hero's request and asks them questions. Their interaction decides the outcome of the scene. As heroes perform actions and interact with characters, the narrator describes to them the outcomes of their endeavors in an amount of detail appropriate to the significance of the action or role-playing encounter. Next, continue. Should the above 3 steps bring players to the end of a scene, the narrator moves on with the adventure. If this is not the case, however, he repeats the process, beginning by describing how the scene is altered as a result of what the heroes and other characters did. Afterward, he asks them what they intend to do next, then resolve any required actions. In many cases, a playing group may need to repeat the sequence several times before overcoming or failing the challenge of the scene. Rewarding heroes. As the heroes explore the world and successfully battle the forces of evil, the narrator should encourage their actions. After all, one of his duties is to make sure the players enjoy themselves in the game. Rewarding the heroes makes players eager to continue the adventure and encourages truly heroic behavior. Hero rewards can take many forms. Reputation increases. When a hero completes an adventure, he marks another quest on his hero sheet. Completing enough quests increases his reputation rating. Monetary rewards. Sometimes adventures can reward heroes, especially those with a mercenary bent, with great wealth. Perhaps a powerful figure offers to pay the heroes for accomplishing the goal of the adventure, such as freeing a town from the ravages of a young dragon. Heroes can turn a profit from quests in other ways too. After all, dragons keep great hoards of treasure in their lairs, gold, silver, and steel just waiting to be claimed. Whenever heroes collect such a reward, they have a chance to increase their social status through the infusion of this new wealth. Items of magic. Among the most sought-after treasures on Krynn, items of magic can mean the difference between success and failure in a hero's later adventures. Exactly how a narrator opts to introduce magical items into his game and what place they play in an extended campaign may vary. Chapter 5 offers details about magic items, especially weapons and armor. There are 3 general types of magical objects that the heroes may find during an adventure. Trinkets. Small magical trinkets, such as an enchanted dagger or a ring, let its wearer see in the dark, can give a hero a minor edge in some situation. As a rule, trinkets have only limited value and just 1 or 2 specific functions. Narrators can create trinkets for heroes to keep as rewards for minor accomplishments. Treasures. Magical treasures carry far greater value than trinkets. They can play a major role in many adventures and often greatly increase a hero's ability. Many magical weapons, such as an extra powerful swords, fall into this category. Treasures should play a major part in the adventure where they first appear. For example, suppose the heroes find a bow that magically causes any arrow it shoots to become a bolt of fire. Later in the adventure, they should encounter a hostile creature that is especially vulnerable to this weapon. Artifacts. Artifacts are incredibly powerful magical objects that the narrator should award to heroes with great care. In most cases, the recovery of an artifact can be the focus of an adventure unto itself. The effort by the heroes of the Lance to recover the discs of Mishakal and the spellbook of Fistandanelis in the novel Dragons of Autumn Twilight exemplifies this sort of quest. Narrators should remember that an artifact powerful enough to have a great effect in the current quest can have a similar effect on subsequent adventures as well, and possessing an artifact can prove dangerous. Just as the heroes were willing to fight and die to claim the object, so too will others risk injury to steal it from them. Encouragement. All this talk of wealth and rewards is not meant to imply that heroes embark on adventures merely for profit. True heroism finds its reward in winning a victory for the cause of good. Therefore, narrators should reinforce this pride in heroism by praising players for clever actions or excellent role-playing. Boosted by these words, players will continue to excel in their chosen roles. All right, we're moving on to Chapter 3. I'm going back to find Tanis. No, my brother, Raceland said softly, his golden eyes glittering in the Lunatary's red light. You cannot help Tanis. His fate is in his own hands. Raceland and Caraman outside the gates of Naraka, dragons of spring dawning. At the heart of any great adventure, story lie... I said that really strangely. At the heart of any great adventure story lie the actions of the heroes and villains. This fact also holds true of the Dragonlance 5th Age game. When the heroes find themselves faced with a problem, whether a locked door or an angry dragon, they have to do something about it. Whatever they decide to do, cast a spell, engage in combat, or attempt subterfuge, they respond with what is called an action. This chapter explains how heroes attempt actions, describes some common actions, and details how to determine whether the hero's actions succeed. It also explains how to determine the behavior of other characters in the game. Action standards. Before Before getting into the details of attempting and resolving actions, it's important to make sure players and narrators understand a few basic concepts used by the Saga rules system. Actions have to occur in some context after all. This initial section describes what goes on during an adventure while actions take place. Time. In the Dragonlance 5th Age game, narrators do not keep track of time in rounds, turns, or other such artificial game concepts. They use minutes, hours, days, and so on, just like in a real world. Usually, what happens from minute to minute isn't vital to the course of an adventure. If the heroes are riding from one place to another, a journey that requires a week or two to complete, the group does not need to play out every minute of the trip. It's far more convenient for the narrator to simply relate the major events of each day or half day and allow the heroes to respond to them. The narrator should base the amount of time it takes a hero to perform an action on his estimate of how much real time the action would require. When the journey itself is not the focus of the adventure, the narrator should feel free to resolve these hero actions in whatever time increments best suit the situation. Perhaps fixing a wagon wheel takes a hero an hour. Perhaps it takes 2. It really doesn't matter in the scope of an adventure. However, small units of time become important in combat or other critical situations. During such scenes, the narrator must keep track of time minute by minute. Movement. Getting from place to place in a continent as large as Anslon can take some effort, especially when the heroes have to move through hostile terrain like the Calcist Mountains or the glacier that covers most of southern Ergoth. Exactly how long does it take a group of heroes to get from one place to another? The narrator should base his decision in part on the distance they have to cover and the type of terrain. It takes longer to travel 100 miles than 50, and longer to traverse a mountain than a plain. However, he should also base the decision on the needs of the adventure's plot as well. If the heroes need to get across the center of action before the end of the week to preserve the plot, the narrator should find a way for them to do it. After all, there can't be a story without them. Walking. Many heroes, due to situation or lack of wealth, find themselves walking from one place to another. In good terrain, a walking man travels at a rate of about 3 miles per hour. Since most heroes are a little sturdier than the average man, the narrator can assume that in an average 8-hour day of hiking, a group of heroes can cover a good 30 miles. Rough terrain takes longer to cross, of course. The following table provides a set of guidelines that narrators can use during play. So I'm not going to read each one of these, but you can look at the terrain, miles per hour, and miles per day. It takes much longer for heroes to cover distance underground than these above-ground rates. Narrators should consider most caves the equivalent of mountainous terrain, limiting the movement of would-be explorers to about 5 miles per day. Riding. Mounted characters usually travel at twice their walking rate, assuming that their mounts are native to the terrain. Those trying to ride elephants through wetlands, however, can expect something less than optimal performance from their mounts, possibly a quarter of their optimum rate. Vehicles. Movement involves horse-drawn wagons and other conveyances, generally comes to half again the listed walking value. Better than walking, but slower than a single rider. Once more, this rate assumes the draft animals are suited to the terrain. Ships. 2 major factors govern movement at sea: the type of vessel and the weather condition. The table below lists some common vessels. So we have a table of vessels, miles per hour, and miles per day, and the type of vessel is listed accordingly. There's an asterisk here. Indicates craft designed primarily for inland and coastal travel. The narrator should regulate their use in seafaring fairly heavily. And then another symbol says, referring to ocean-going craft similar to galleys with either 2 or 3 tiers of oars. The movement rate in the table above assumes that the vessel is traveling under average weather conditions. In excellent conditions, narrators may increase the movement rate by half. In poor weather, they should half the listed movement rate. Journeying by ship assumes a longer traveling day than land-based methods. Often, a naval vessel will travel 24 hours a day. If heroes at sea do not use this full travel day, narrators should cut the listed rates in half. Some of the above craft can also serve for river travel, starred vessels, or marsh or pond lake travel as judged by the narrator. Anyone wishing to set an entire adventure aboard a ship of course, may want to add further detail on the vessel's motive systems, sails versus oars, crew, and even water hazards. Aerial movement. Clearly, men, elves, and dwarves are not flying creatures. On the rare occasions that they travel by air, heroes ride winged creatures such as dragons, pegasi, and griffins. In such cases, the narrator should base the rate of travel upon the type of mount. The following chart offers some guidance. So here we have the mount, the miles per hour, and the miles per day that the mount can fly, or drive, or walk, or whatever, or roll. Again, the above rates assume typical flying conditions, an 8-hour travel day, and a standard load. If a mount is being asked to carry a heavy load or fly in bad weather, the narrator should half these rates. Under ideal conditions, they might increase by as much as 50%. Generally, mounts can keep up with these rates daily for a week before needing a couple days to rest. Some heroes may have opportunity to travel by aerial conveyance, such as a balloon or glider. In such cases, the narrator should estimate the speed of the vehicle based on the figures above in addition to wind or magical effects. Balloons. That's got to be a thinker gnome's invention. Weather. One of the most volatile forces adventurers will confront as they explore Ansalon is weather. Usually, though, weather does not become a pressing issue in game terms. Whether it's cold and cloudy or warm and sunny doesn't affect the average legendary quest. Sometimes, however, the local climate becomes important. For example, climbing a sheer cliff isn't easy under the best of conditions. In a freezing ice storm, it seems almost impossible. A good way to decide the weather in most cases is to simply match the conditions in the adventure with the current weather as the players arrive to the game. Thus, if it's raining outside, it's raining for the heroes too. Of course, this doesn't always work. If the heroes are adventuring on the Ice Wall Glacier, they're going to be cold, even if the players have gathered in a game in August in the heart of Texas. The narrator can choose to describe the game's weather by checking the geographic descriptions in Chapter 2 of Dusk or Dawn. As with every standard discussion in this section, the most important aspect of the weather is its effect on play. If the adventure involves the heroes exploring the haunted towers of Dargard Keep and Nightland, the narrator should describe a savage thunderstorm with pounding rain, booming thunder, and brilliant flashes of lightning. Should the group become stranded on a hot desert of the northern wastes, the sky should certainly be clear, and the narrator's description should help the players feel the merciless rays of the sun streaming, blistering upon the heroes. Lighting and vision. Many times, heroes find themselves forced to explore unlighted places, whether the scene is a dark and mysterious dungeon or simply the gloom of a thick forest at midnight. The heroes need to worry about light sources and their range of vision. Unless darkness is important to the story, narrators should assume the heroes can make a light of some sort, whether they have lighted torches, a glowing gem, or a magical spell. Resourceful adventurers, like the heroes, won't let themselves be caught in the dark. When the issue of light and darkness becomes critical to the game, the narrator should assume that the most conventional light sources illuminate an area somewhere between 25 and 50 feet in diameter, depending on the source. A torch might provide effective light for up to 30 feet, for example. Specifically designed spells or other radiances may light larger areas as the narrator's discretion. The Hand of Fate. During the game, each player holds a hand of fate cards he uses to determine whether his hero succeeds at the various actions he attempts. The hero's reputation rating is determined during hero creation, dictates how many cards a player can hold. This hand of fate generally contains between 4 and 5 cards for new heroes. After shuffling the fate cards and dealing out the correct number to each player, the narrator places the remainder of the deck face down on the table as the draw pile. Players place the cards they use in action attempts facing up next to it as they discard pile. For games of up to 6 players, narrators need only one fate deck. However, even larger groups may run through cards faster, requiring an extra deck. After the players have gone through the entire draw pile, the narrator must reshuffle the deck. Only players keep hands of cards. The narrator does not maintain a hand of fate for each character or monster. Types of actions. Over the course of an adventure, a hero will attempt many actions. Most of them will fall into one of 2 categories: unopposed actions and opposed actions. Unopposed actions. An action is unopposed when the hero faces no active resistance from a character, monster, or other creature. All that matters is the hero's own skill. Attempting to pick a lock is an unopposed action. Attempting to hit someone in a brawl is not. An unopposed action is easier to resolve than an opposed action, for the hero generally has a good understanding of the variables the action entails. In picking a lock, for instance, the hero knows that the mechanism isn't going to try wriggling around to avoid his pick. That would be a hilarious thing. You're like, your first clue that you're trying to pick a mimic as a lock is if it keeps moving around. The hero determines the success or failure of an unopposed action wholly by his own efforts. Opposed actions. An opposed action is one in which the hero faces active resistance from someone. A hero attempting to arm wrestle with a character in a tavern must pit his abilities against his opponents to emerge from the contest triumphant. There are various types of opposed actions, all of which use the same basic saga resolution rules. Combat actions. A hero's attempt to strike an enemy or defend himself from an attack generally meets some opposition. Because of the many unusual features of battle, however, combat actions are dealt with separately in Chapter 4. Magic actions. Ancillon in the 5th Age features 2 types of magic: sorcery and mysticism. Attempts to use such arcane powers are resolved using magic actions, which are frequently opposed. Like combat actions, spellcasting has so many variables it is described separately in Chapter 5. And oh boy does it. Performing actions. As mentioned earlier, a player uses cards from his Hand of Fate to attempt various actions. No matter what type of action the hero is trying to perform, from casting a spell to picking a lock, the narrator determines success or failure through a simple action resolution method. The general sequence of action resolution is as follows. 1. The player declares the hero's intended action, or narrator declares that the scene requires an action. 2. Narrator determines the ability relevant to the action success and announces it to the players. 3. Narrator decides action's difficulty. 4. Player selects one card to attempt the action. For opposed actions, the narrator applies an opposition value at this point. If the player's point score beats the action's difficulty, including opposition, the hero completes the action. Step 1. Declaration. In most cases, an action begins with when the player tells the narrator what his hero will attempt to do in the current scene. For example, Jim might announce that his character, Kalen, is going to try his hand at picking a lock or hitting a monster with his sword. Sometimes the narrator begins the process by telling a player his hero must attempt an action. This usually happens when a hero has to avoid a monster's attack or otherwise resist a hazardous situation. For example, Kalen, while battling a troll, may find himself called upon to defend himself from the beast's slashing claws. The hero with the highest perception score usually declares his intention or responds to the narrator's announcement first. Should 2 heroes have identical scores, the one with the best perception code goes first. If the heroes have identical scores and codes, the players repeat the process using the hero's agility scores. If the tie persists, the hero with the highest reputation rating takes precedence. Should all of these options fail to break the tie, the narrator can assume that both heroes act simultaneously. Step 2. The action ability. Now the narrator considers the declared action and the various factors that might relate to it. First, he determines which of the hero's abilities is best suited to the task at hand. This is called the action ability. For instance, if Kalen wants to lift a heavy weight, he would make use of his strength. The suit associated with the ability score becomes the trump suit for the action in question. The following guidelines can help with this decision. Agility, shields, used to dodge missile weapons, attacks, or attempt acrobatic feats of nimbleness. Dexterity, arrows, used to attack with missile or thrown weapons and for fine manipulation tasks like picking locks or palming objects. Endurance, helms, used to resist melee attacks, survive poisoning, withstand pain or fatigue, and other shows of physical stamina. Strength, swords, used to attack with a melee weapon or to resolve tests of raw physical strength. Reason, moons, used to resolve logic puzzles, recall details, or invoke the powers of sorcery. Perception, orbs, used to resist attacks based on sorcery or to receive information from one's senses. Spirit, hearts, used to draw upon one's willpower, test one's passions, and invoke the powers of mysticism. Presence, crowns, used to resist an attack based on mysticism, make a good or bad impression, inspire one's followers, and intimidate a foe. Once the narrator has selected the ability relevant to the challenge at hand, he tells the player the action ability. Thus, if Kalen were to try breaking down a door, the narrator would tell his player to attempt a strength action. The player can then begin thinking about which card from his hand he wants to play for this action. Oh yeah, Minotaur Kool-Aid manning it through the door. Kool-Aid! Step 3. Action difficulty. With an action ability in mind, the narrator must next determine the likelihood that the hero will succeed in his efforts. The given action's degree of challenge is reflected by its difficulty level, with the associated numeric difficulty rating. The following table describes the range of action difficulty. So we'll see here the difficulty level, difficulty ratings for the difficulty, and these are the numbers that you add in opposition to the player's score. And the players have to get over this in order to successfully do whatever they want to do. Easy, 4. Easy actions require almost no thought or effort on the part of the hero. Examples of easy tasks include remembering the path to the home of a friend the hero visits regularly, reason, or catching an object tossed by another hero or character, dexterity. However, easy actions do involve some small risk of failure to distinguish them from activities heroes could perform automatically. Average, 8. Average actions require some attention from the hero, but present only a minor obstacle. Examples include staying in the saddle during a vault, agility, or following a marked trail, perception. Most of the hero's actions attempts during the game will be average. If the action sounds like something a common man would hesitate to try, but a hero does all the time, it's probably considered average. However, even an average action can prove difficult if opposed by a foe. Challenging. 12. Other actions pose a serious challenge to the heroes. Examples include picking a high-quality lock, dexterity, or scaling a crumbling, dangerous wall, agility. Challenging actions should give even a great hero pause. Thanks for joining live, Chris. Good to see you. Oh, thank you for that. Really appreciate it, man. It's going to be a good one. Daunting, 16. Heroes likely will attempt daunting actions in the heat of an adventure, but normal folks would never consider trying such actions. Examples include leaping across a flaming gorge, agility, picking up a masterfully constructed lock, dexterity, or deciphering an ancient code, reason. Narrators should understand that an action this difficult is doomed to failure if the character doesn't have a trump card. See below. Desperate, 20. Even experienced heroes attempt desperate actions only in the most dire of situations. Examples of such Herculean feats include holding up a collapsing wall, strength, or shaking off the effects of a very deadly poison, endurance. Even heroes think twice about attempting these actions, as they are impossible without a trump card and a good second to draw. Impossible, 24. Impossible tasks become the stuff of legend, such as when the great Salamity Knight Huma drove a Dragonlance through the scales of the Dark Queen Takhisis herself in the Third Dragon War. Anyone who succeeds in an impossible feat automatically increases his number of quests by 1, for word of his feat soon spreads to all corners of Ansalon. Keeping difficulty a secret. In the real world, of course, we don't know the difficulty of a task until we've tried it a time or two. Therefore, to the narrator does not inform the players of the difficulty level or rating of his hero's actions. Thus, he would keep the difficulty rating of Kaelin's strength action to himself. This forces the player to carefully gauge what his hero is about to attempt, just as he himself would before attempting an action in real life, and play a card accordingly. Step 4. Playing a card. Now that he knows his action ability, the player selects one card, known as the action card, from his hand to play. Because he doesn't know the difficulty level and rating assigned to the task, the player must try to estimate the severity of the challenge before him and select the best single card for it. For example, Kaelin attempts to force open an ancient door. Meanwhile, a pack of ghouls is charging towards him. He knows that if he fails to open the door, he could die in the clutches. Looking at his hand of fate, Kaelin's player sees his highest card is an 8. Because of the importance of this task, he plays the 8 and hopes for the best. Having selected a card from his hand, the player lays it face up on the discard pile. This done, he draws a card from the draw pile to replace it. Unless his hero is wounded, the player always maintains the number of cards indicated by his reputation rating. Action score. Now the player adds the value of the action card he just played to his hero's action ability score. The total of these two numbers is called his action score. For example, say Kaelin is currently attempting a strength-based action. His strength score is 12 and his player discards an 8, so Kaelin has an action score of 15. Trump cards. If the suit of the action card matches the suit of the action ability, the action card is considered trump. Sometimes a hero's race or role gives him the advantage, for certain types of actions only, of treating the action card as a trump regardless of its actual suit. After drawing a replacement card and determining his action score, a hero player who has just used a trump card may turn over the top card of the fate deck and add its numeric value to his action score. If that card is also trump, that is, if its suit matches that of the original action card, the player repeats this process until either a non-trump card turns up or he opts to stop turning over new cards. A trump bonus based on a racial or role advantage applies only to the original action card, not to the subsequent cards turned from the deck. So a trump bonus based on racial or role advantage, but if it's a trump card naturally, then you can continue to keep adding it. Players are never required to take advantage of the trump bonus. If a player is confident that his hero will succeed in an action without his current action score, he can choose not to turn over an extra card, but instead stand with his original action score. Perhaps he wants to keep those trump cards in the deck for when they become really necessary. A player also might decide not to use his trump bonus for using it carries a racial disadvantage. For instance, if a thinker gnome hero uses his racial trump bonus to fix the device, the action takes him twice as long as it normally would. See Chapter 1 for more on racial advantages and disadvantages. Let's return to the example of Kaelin and his attempt to break down the door, a strength action. If the card chosen by Kaelin's player, Jim, was the 8 of Swords, Jim could turn over the top card on the Fate deck and add its score to his action score. Because he isn't sure how difficult his task will be, he decides to do so. After all, it is a big door, and these ghouls are getting closer. Jim turns over the 6 of Helms, increasing Kaelin's action score from 15 to 21. If the card had been the 6 of Swords, Jim could have decided to flip the next card to further increase his total. Step 5, Resolution. If the player's total action score is equal to or higher than the action's difficulty rating, the hero has successfully accomplished the action. Should the action score come out lower than the action difficulty rating, the hero has failed. The narrator might judge the severity of the failure by the number of points the hero has lacked to achieve his difficulty rating. Mishaps. In most cases, a failed action doesn't have any ill consequences associated with it, apart from those inherent in the action, of course. From time to time, however, something unforeseen goes wrong. When this happens, it's called a mishap. A mishap becomes possible only when a player uses a card from the suite of dragons to attempt his actions. Thus, only by choosing such a card does a player open himself up to the chance of a mishap. When a player attempts an action with a card from the suit of dragons and fails, a mishap occurs. The narrator determines the exact consequences based on the nature of the attempted action. If Jim had played the Eight of Dragons for Kalen's attempt to break down the door, he would have risked a mishap. Assuming Kalen's action score came just a few points shy of the difficulty rating, the narrator would probably rule that Kalen had hurt his shoulder when he smashed into the door, reducing his strength score by a point for the rest of the game, or act or session. If he misses by more than a few points, however, the narrator might rule that he has broken his shoulder and would be unable to use his arm for the rest of the game. Opposed actions. An opposed action is one in which the hero faces active resistance from another person or monster. Because the other figure involved in the action is doing his best to thwart the efforts of the hero, the action resolution process requires an extra step. Opposition value. A foe uses one of his abilities to try to resist the hero's actions. Right after he determines the action difficulty, step 4 of the opposed action, the narrator selects the foe's appropriate opposition ability. His endurance might block a hero's melee attack, perception opposes a sorcery spell, and so on. Naturally, the action becomes harder when someone opposes the hero's attempts. To reflect this increased difficulty, the narrator must add the opposition ability score called the opposition value to the action's difficulty rating. For example, if the Kender Belladonna wants to go through Kalen's backpack without his knowledge, the narrator realizes Kalen might notice her. Therefore, he uses Kalen's perception as the opposition ability for Belladonna's action. His perception score is 3. Assuming that the backpack was readily accessible, the narrator might consider this an easy action, with a difficulty of 4. After adding Kalen's opposition value, the final difficulty of the opposition task becomes a 7. Most actions will not be opposed by another hero or character, but by a monster or similar creature. Creatures do not normally have the 8 ability scores that describe heroes. They have only 4 pairs of related abilities: physique, coordination, intellect, and essence. In these cases, the creature's appropriate related ability becomes the opposition ability. Chapter 6 offers additional details on monsters and similar creatures. Returning to the example of Belladonna, this time the Kender is trying to sneak past a goblin sentry. It is night, and nothing in the environment makes sneaking especially difficult. All things considered, the narrator considers this an easy action, 4. As the goblin opposes this action with his intellect rating of 4, the difficulty of the action increases to 8. Action format. Published 5th Age Adventures use the format below to present any complex actions heroes are expected or asked to attempt. Name of the action, difficulty, the level rating, action ability, the ability name, and opposing ability, ability name. Comments. Adjustments to the difficulty of the action or other important facts are presented in the first paragraph of an action description. Unless this section states otherwise, a failure merely means that the action doesn't work. It carries no unusual repercussions. Mishap. The next section of an action description explains the ill effects of a mishap, should the player employ cards from the suite of dragons and fail in the action. And this is the asterisk to the ability name for opposition ability. A specific opposition ability is always listed here, even though the individual resisting the hero's actions might be a monster or minor character with only 4 related ability scores. In case the opponent is a hero or a fully detailed character, the action description always lists the exact ability. You need to tuck in the youngest kid earlier so you can make these live streams in time. Sorry, man. And I don't really, for these, I don't really give any heads up either. It's just like if I have some time, I'm going to jump in and do it. For the game, this coming Saturday, I think this is the 22nd, it's going to start, I think, at 12 noon Mountain Time. So I'll put that up, just so you know, so you can plan on it if you want to join us. Shorthand and notation. Adventures present actions that are less complex or not vital to the flow of a scene in the shorthand format below: difficulty, actionability, opposition ability. This technique works best when an action's effect appears obvious, with minimal or equally apparent mishap effects. For instance, a hero might have to attempt an average perception action to notice the telltale odor of a particular poison. Such a straightforward action does not require a long explanation, such as the one described above. The description passage on the next page offers an example of how a reader might see the shorthand action format used in a 5th Age adventure. Give me a second here. Last night, my nephew had a boxing match, and so I was like screaming, just cheering him on and stuff. And now my throat is just killing me. He won, though. As the heroes explore the tunnel, they may feel the effects of a dangerous gases that have seeped in over time. This hazard forces all heroes to attempt an average endurance action for every 10 minutes they stay underground. Those who fail lose consciousness. The effects of failure at this unopposed action appear clearly in the text. A mishap might indicate that a hero suffered an injury during his collapse or have an allergic reaction to the gas. The narrator can resolve either possibility without special instructions. As with full action descriptions, shorthand notations for opposed actions list a specific opposition ability in parentheses. If a creature rather than a major character resists the action, the narrator should substitute the appropriate related ability. Sample actions. The following examples give narrators an idea of the types of actions heroes will attempt during play and the difficulties associated with them. These samples can also serve as templates for constructing other actions during play. The first two are unopposed, while the second two offer opposition. A listing of other standard actions appears in Appendix 3. Breaking down a door. Difficulty, average 8. Action ability, strength. Opposition ability, none. Comments. The above difficulty applies to an attempt to break down a standard exterior door. For interior doors, this action becomes easy, while a reinforced or barred door increases the difficulty by 1 degree to challenging. Mishap. The hero has injured himself in his attempt to force open the door. He must discard 1 card from his hand until he is healed or recovers. Pick a lock. Difficulty, average 8. Action ability, dexterity. Opposition ability, none. Commons. The above difficulty applies for the average lock and assumes the hero has lock picks or other appropriate tools. For a lock of unusually good manufacture, or if the hero must use improvised tools, the difficulty increases 1 degree. A poor lock or the use of superior tools makes the action easy. Mishap, the hero has broken the lock, making it impossible for anyone to pick. Tell a convincing lie. Difficulty, easy, 4. Action ability, presence. Opposition ability, perception. Commons. This action's above difficulty assumes the hero has made up a fairly believable story that his listener is not predisposed to doubt him. A real whopper or a suspicious audience might increase the difficulty of this action to average or even challenging. Mishap. Not only has the listener detected the falsehood, he reacts very poorly to being lied to. He may attack, call for local authorities, or publicly denounce the hero. Intimidate a thug. Difficulty, average 8. Action ability, presence. Opposition ability, spirit. Commons. The average difficulty applies when the hero and the thug are more or less equally matched in strength. If the hero is overly imposing or the thug is particularly cowardly, the narrator could reduce the difficulty. If the reverse is true, the actions become more difficult. Mishap. Someone has called the hero's bluff, which enrages the target of this intimidation. His exact response will vary depending on the circumstances, but he might attack the hero. Creating an action. The beauty of Saga rules system is that everything a hero wants to do in a scene can be treated as an action. Any activity the hero thinks to attempt, they can try using the process related in this chapter. All player and narrators need to create actions on the spot is determine 1. What ability does the hero use to attempt the action? Is it a strength action, a reason action? 2. How hard should it be to accomplish the action based on the circumstances of the situation? Logically, it's easier to leap a 3-foot chasm than an 8-foot one. And 3. Does anyone oppose the attempt? If so, with which ability? Action strategies. It is important for the narrator to drive home the fact that every action challenges the heroes. These attempts reflect the most important and exciting events in each scene, so no player should undertake them lightly. High versus low cards. All actions require card play. If the player thinks a particular action facing his hero is fairly simple or has no opposition, he should take that opportunity to use a lower card from his hand, reserving the high cards for more difficult actions. However, players may be tempted to get rid of their low cards by attempting many frivolous actions that present little risk of failure. Narrators should recall from Chapter 2 that any activity a hero should be able to perform automatically is not strictly considered an action. Such a minor feat requires no card play. After the player announces his hero's intent, the narrator should simply reply that he succeeded automatically. Role-playing and actions. While role-playing an encounter can be an alternative to attempting an action, the narrator should not treat actions as activities devoid of role-playing. After all, it's the hero's reaction to the events of a scene that spurs him to action, and his response to his action's outcome involves role-playing as well. The following few hints can help narrators keep role-playing prominent while heroes attempt actions. Let the suit of the action card reflect how the hero attempts the action. If faced with a locked door, for instance, a player might use a strength card indicating the hero is trying to force it open. Another hero may play a reason card, which could give his hero a chance to figure out a way to find a key or to get around the door. Actions offer limitless role-playing possibilities. In any action, the narrator should provide plenty of description, evoking a clear picture in the player's mind of the scene unfolding before them. Card play without storytelling bores players. If a hero's attempt to search for a clue and finds one, thanks to his high perception action score, it is up to the narrator to make the player feel the frustration of the search and the excitement of the discovery. Character actions. As stated earlier, heroes are the ones who would actually attempt actions during a scene. However, the characters in an adventure, both friends and foes, should be able to act in their own or the group's interest as well. These activities of the individuals are usually resolved in one of two ways. Because the saga rules are meant to focus on the heroes, the success or failure of enemies' actions is reflected in their opposition to the hero's actions. For instance, say a hero is trying to hide from an ogre. The hero attempts an average reason or agility action to hide, opposed by the ogre's perception or intellect. So the ogre need not attempt an action to find the hero. If the hero fails his hide action, it discovers him. Sometimes the narrator determines a character's actions based on the needs of the story. For instance, a character's failure at attacking a dragon and his resultant injury or death should hint to the heroes that perhaps they should flee. Yeah, no shit. Therefore, the narrator should simply describe to the players what the character attempted and what the consequences arose. In this way, character actions can further the plot and promote the flow of the adventure. My best reaction in every case of seeing a dragon is to flee. Just putting it out there. Going toes with the dragon is ridiculous and stupid, and you have to be a super badass to do it. From time to time, however, the narrator may find it desirable to use other methods to resolve characters' actions. Friends and companions. If the character in question is a close ally or companion of one of the heroes, the narrator can instruct that hero players to select a card for his action. This method is especially appropriate when the character has come to mean a great deal to the players, such as someone's sidekick or an important hireling. This resolution method treats the action just like an attempt by a hero, including the playing of trump cards, even trump bonuses based on the character's race and role, the potential for mishaps, and so on. If a narrator sees the players are continually using their lowest cards for allies' actions, he should remind them that it's not in the group's best interest for the players or for the characters to fail. Perhaps he should even set up several crucial character actions to drive the point home. Other characters. The narrator might use a random draw from the fate deck to see whether a character's action succeeds. Once he decides the action, ability, and difficulty, he simply flips over the top card of the deck and treats it as the action card. He then handles all the action resolution normally, including the drawing of an additional card after the trump and the potential for mishaps. Optional methods. The cards of the Fate deck allow truly inspired narrators to resolve heroes' actions in various ways. This chapter has already described the easiest, most all-purpose method. However, narrators should sprinkle some uses of other techniques throughout their games as well, for variety. The narrator can choose one of two alternate methods for resolving actions. Or he can create a new one all his own based on the concepts described in the following sections. Random draw. Resolving a hero's action with a random draw begins normally. The narrator assigns the task and action ability, opposition ability if needed, and difficulty. However, to add a feeling of chance to the action, the narrator can ask the player not to use a card from his hand to complete the action. Instead, the player draws a card from the top of the Fate deck and uses it to resolve the action. The player figures his hero's action scores based on the numeric value of the random card he just drew. A trump card allows another draw, as usual, and a dragon's card still causes a mishap. The players discard his random draw upon completing the action. Interpretive methods. Narrators may choose to use other features of the cards instead of their numeric value to resolve actions. Reading card color. By now, readers have probably noted the marbled background colors on the cards in the Fate deck. A card's primary background color identifies its suit. And now we have a table here of what the different suit is, what the ability associated with that suit is, and what the color associated with that suit is. There is an asterisk on the dragon's mishap, white, red, black. The three swirled colors of the suite of dragons refers not to an ability, but to the continuum of good and evil, as described below. The presence of all three colors on each card indicates the unpredictable nature of dragons. Even chromatic, evil worms may do a hero a good turn if it suits their hidden purposes. The suites of a related pair of abilities have similar colors, and the colors of the physical and mental abilities each come from the same color palette. Each card's icon box contains an aura color, determined by the card's numeric value. This color symbolizes one of Kryn's 3 lost moons, which vanished at the close of the Fourth Age. It also indicates relative position of the card's illustrated character on the continuum of good and evil. So we have the aura and moon color, the value it represents, and the symbolism it represents. Narrators can make quick and easy decisions regarding the outcome of a hero's action by referring to the colors on a randomly drawn card. For instance, say the warrior Kalen attempted to create an accurate map of the fortress he just escaped. His success depends on how the narrator chooses to interpret his action's card's colors. Perhaps the narrator is looking for a turquoise card, indicating the suite of arrows, the trump suit for actions such as drawing and other fine work. If Kalen's player draws turquoise, the warrior successfully sketches the map. The card's numeric value can even indicate his degree of success, however, should he draw a different color, he fails to accurately render the floor plan. The narrator might decide to use the color associated with the action ability as just a starting point for determining whether the action succeeds. Playing a turquoise card might indicate that Kalen has drawn a perfect map, while a green card represents the suite of shields, arrows related suit, means he created merely a good map. Any color associated with a physical ability should imply some degree of success, while a mental ability color reflects varying degrees of failure. If the narrator wants to give the player a more even chance, he can base his judgment on the aura color, interpreting white as a positive factor pointing to success, black as indicative of failure, and red as an uncertain result. The fact that every card has a positive, negative, or neutral identity makes the Fate deck quite useful during play for fleshing out the role-playing experience. For instance, say Kalen enters the Inn of the Last Home and notices a man eyeing him. This character may have been a mere background detail in the narrator's description of the inn, one who serves no real purpose to the scene. However, should Kalen focus on this character and ask about him, the narrator can make a random draw. A white aura makes the character a kindly old man. Red means the figure looks mysterious. Black, of course, tells Kalen that the brute's twisted scowl sends a shiver down his spine. Of course, the man may just have had a bad day, but Kalen doesn't know that. Mix in the primary color of the randomly drawn card, and the narrator can easily generate a profession or physical appearance for the new character. A card with a white aura and a gold background makes the figure a benevolent nobleman, and so on. Interpreting portraits. Of course, the cards of the Fate deck feature not only numbers and colors, but also portraits for more than 80 of the Dragonlance Saga's best-known characters, with a couple of words describing each one. A narrator familiar with these characters can use what he knows to help him determine the outcome of a hero's actions. For instance, if Kalen's attempt to draw the map, the warrior's player has used the Tasselhoff Burfoot card. The narrator knows that Taz always had a map for every occasion, though somewhat questionable accuracy, and rules accordingly. If the player had drawn the Tanishath Elven or Riverwind cards, each portraying characters with excellent direction sense, he'd have succeeded even better. The Lord Ariakan card could have yielded a good map as well. This master of battle strategy invented the battle box to help him map out deployment of his troops. Of course, the Highbulb the First Gully Dwarf card would mean trouble. Even those who don't feel extremely knowledgeable about the characters on the cards can still gain role-playing color by interpreting the portraits and/or descriptive terms on each card. For instance, the terms might illustrate the manner in which a character succeeded or failed in the action resolved using a non-interpretive method. The appendix of Dusk or Dawn contains brief descriptions of all the figures pictured in the Fate deck to help with interpretations or to jog a player's memory about the character. A bit of both. Sometimes it's interesting to inject a bit of randomness into play while using an interpretive technique. The random draw technique works best in situations where the hero's fate is not entirely in his own hands. Say Kalen enters a town and he's never visited before and wishes to look up the local circle of Slannic Knights. Is there a group of knights here? Kalen's actions can do little to influence the answer to that question. Either the town has a circle or it doesn't. A card draw using the positive-negative meanings of the aura can answer yes or no. Both of these resolution techniques also help prevent players from delaying play while they build up a high number of cards in the hand fate in preparation for an important event in the adventure. Clever players might putter around attempting non-relevant actions and trying to avoid an impending combat encounter until they draw a Nine of Swords, for instance. Narrators should treat such attempts to manipulate fate by shifting to random draw or interpretive actions. Finally, using an interpretive method or using interpretation of random draws increases the importance of the low-numbered cards in the player's hands. The cards with white auras, representing predominantly good characters with positive qualities, also bear the lowest numeric values, 1 to 3. Players might not find these cards useful to complete certain actions using an action score-based resolution method. After all, a 2 of Moons can't add to the point total the way the 8 would. However, if the narrator uses an interpretive resolution style, that 2, a positive card, suddenly becomes quite a valuable commodity. A final word on the optional methods. Frequent variations in action resolution methods are important to the 5th Age game in that they allow players to manipulate the storyline and utilize their low cards to the best advantage. Narrators who use only the action score-based resolution method in their games are not taking full advantage of many facets of the Fate deck. All right. Can I get through Chapter 4? Ooh. I've used all these methods in my games in the past. I love using the interpretive method when it comes to just NPC and PC interaction. I think it's a great way of figuring out how someone initially feels about someone else or the initial environment or atmosphere. It's just so intuitive, and it really comes from this background of tarot and interpretation. Chapter 4. Draconians! Tanis shouted. Tanis jumped to attack the dazed creature before it could gather its wits. He swung his sword. The Draconian's head parted from its neck and blood spurted. Sheathing his sword, Tanis grabbed the body before it could topple, dragged it up over the wall, and shoved it over the edge. Battle of the High Clerist's Tower, Dragons of Summer Flame. Heroes often find themselves called upon to engage in battles ranging from minor brawls and wrestling matches to knightly jousts and chaotic melees. Large or small, however, the narrator handles all battles in the same way. Combat, like most other events in a Dragonlance 5th Age game, is resolved via scenes and actions, although combat sequences get somewhat more complex than the general actions presented in the last chapter. Narrators resolve them using the familiar rules. Standard terms. Before discussing combat in detail, this chapter offers definitions of a number of commonly used terms. Ranges. Many role-playing games depend on careful battle measurements to resolve combat. As the Dragonlance 5th Age game focuses on drama rather than strict calculations of weapon ranges, it uses a more abstract system of combat ranges. Visual range. Two characters at visual range can see each other but are too distant to actually interact in any meaningful way. They could conceivably communicate via flags or other signals, but could not enter combat at such extreme range. Artillery range. As characters draw closer, they leave visual range and enter artillery range. Although still quite distant, such figures could attack each other with catapults, bombards, or other missile weapons. Personal weapons like bows and crossbows remain useless at this range. Communication via flags or other signals is still possible, but voices seldom carry this far. Far missile range. Moving still closer, characters will come into far missile range. Here, they may freely exchange fire with weapons like bows and crossbows, but throwing weapons like spears falls short of their targets. At this distance, enemies' units are assumed to be too close to attack with artillery weapons. See above. Those are far missile range, can communicate with shouts. Near missile range. At near missile range, thrown weapons like spears, javelins, and war darts prove effective, as do missile weapons like bows and crossbows. Characters at near missile range can communicate by shouting. Melee range. At melee range, characters have drawn close enough to attack each other with swords and axes and other handheld weapons. Any manner of bow, crossbow, or other missile weapon becomes useless in melee combat. The same is true of thrown weapons. Although certain of these arms can be held and used in melee, unarmed attacks also become possible at this range. Opponents at melee range can communicate freely by speaking in a normal voice. Indeed, heroes and villains often exchange threats or taunts during melee combat. Personal range. Personal range, the closest of the range category, seldom comes into play. Well, that is unless you're Tanis and Kitiara. Characters at this range are locked in a wrestling hold or otherwise entangled. They can use only very light melee weapons, as all others prove too clumsy for such intimate combat. Characters battling at personal range can communicate in normal voices or even hushed whisper inaudible to others in the area. Time. In most combat sequences, as well as other fast-paced scenes like chases, the narrator keeps track of time minute by minute. This manner of timekeeping becomes especially important when characters fight at far missile range or closer. If the opposing units remain at artillery range, the narrator should probably track time in 5 or 10-minute intervals. With characters at visual range, time passes in quarter or half-hour increments. The chart below indicates the average time required for a single exchange of attacks at a given range. At longer ranges, when attacks are impossible, the narrator can take the time requirement figured as a timekeeping suggestion. So we see range category and the time required for an exchange in that. And that makes sense. At visual range, that's so far off, anything can really happen during that time. Artillery, if you're shooting a catapult, you have to wait for it to occur, and then you have to wait for a return volley. So according to the chart, heroes may attempt 1 action per minute at melee range and 2 actions per minute at personal range, but only 1 action per hour at visual range. Of course, the circumstances of the game may dictate a different rate of play. Heroes' duties. This chapter describes certain combat-related tasks assigned to various heroes in the group. The players themselves may assign these duties, or the narrator may determine them as needed. The most frequent assigned hero duties include the leader. Unless the player indicates otherwise, the leader of an adventuring party is the hero with the highest presence score. Narrators should note that this term applies only to military matters. It does not indicate the peasants might give orders to members of the nobility by virtue of a higher presence score. Throughout the adventures of the heroes of the lance, Tanis Half-Elven usually served as leader. The Scout and the Sentry. A group of heroes often employ a scout when moving through unexplored or dangerous regions. When a party of adventurers sets up camp for the night or otherwise pauses its travels, the hero often positions a sentry or lookout to make sure no enemies sneak up on them. Unless otherwise assigned, the two heroes with the highest perception scores serve in these two capacities, switching roles as often as they like. Often, the cheerful Kender Tasselhoff Burrfoot operated as the scout for the heroes of the lance, while Sturm Brightblade and the plainsman Riverwind frequently held sentry duty. Surprise! At the start of any combat sequence, each side risks being caught off guard by the enemy. When surprised, an individual is unable to act for a brief time except to defend himself, and his opponent receives one free attack, as described below. A narrator bases the chance that the group will survive opponents or be surprised on the skills of its leader, a scout, or posted sentry. A hero surprised by his enemy loses his attack action for that exchange of blows, but recovers in time to defend himself normally. Thus, he has a chance to escape injury, though he can inflict no harm upon his attacker. Surprise during combat doesn't always occur right at the start of battle. A force that makes a sudden, unexpected maneuver can catch its enemies off guard in the midst of a fight. There's always a chance both sides in an encounter could be surprised, in which case both sides receive free attacks. Related disadvantages. In combat, narrators should also consider other conditions besides surprise that can put an individual at a disadvantage. In some cases, a combatant might face a slight penalty due to the previous injury. Other times, a figure might take another so unawares that he automatically hits him, possibly even killing the foe before he knows what's going on. Several terms describe combat disadvantages related to surprise. Helpless. A figure is helpless when paralyzed, asleep, or otherwise unable to defend himself in any way. Normally, an attacker can automatically slay or incapacitate a helpless person instantly without an actual attack action. Stunned. A stunned individual may feel dazed from a blow, confused by a spell, or otherwise bewildered. Such a person can neither attack nor defend himself. Any attack targeted at him inflicts its normal damage. Impaired. An impaired figure has been partially blinded or finds himself otherwise unable to operate at his full potential. An impaired person defends himself normally and can even attempt to hit his enemy. However, when an impaired individual attacks, the narrator increases the action's difficulty 1 degree. Attacks and counterattacks. Once combat begins, it proceeds with a series of attacks and counterattacks. In essence, an attack is simply an opportunity for every hero on the same side of a battle to perform an action. A counterattack offers the hero's foes the chance to do the same. The term attack is used to define strike by the heroes, while a counterattack indicates a blow from the enemies. Thus, it becomes possible for a counterattack to occur even without an initial attack from the heroes, or for a counterattack to precede the hero's attack. While attack and counterattack actions are usually combative in nature, heroes and characters may attempt other non-violent actions during combat as well, such as maneuvering. Combat in a scene. With the terms defined, players and narrators can move on the actual process of handling combat. For ease of reference, this section contains 3 separate parts: before combat, during combat, and after combat. Before combat. Narrators must weigh a number of considerations before combat can begin. For the most part, these factors dictate the flow of the coming battle. What is the initial combat range? Were the heroes surprised? Did the heroes surprise their foes? Combat range. The first thing a narrator must determine is the range at which combat begins. Often he can simply mandate the range according to the game situation or the actions of the heroes. However, the terrain that heroes are traveling through frequently dictates the initial range. The following table offers a list of terrains and the range at which combat usually begins in each type of region. This is a great suggestion, not just for this game, but for any. Gives you your types of terrain, which is extensive, and the initial range of combat in that terrain. And it has everything to do with the land or an environment itself. So of course, if you are indoors, you're going to come into melee contact before combat begins. But if you're in a vast desert, you're probably going to see them at visual range before they can get anywhere close to you. So I'm just going to let you run through these and just look at them really quick. This is this is like, Dungeon Master's Guide, AD&D type stuff, which is what I really love. Another part about reading all of this is just the fact that this is all specific to this game, but you can see how it came from Advanced Dungeons and Dragons, because all of these types of details that they're putting into this were the same details from the same authors that made like the Wilderness Survival Guide, the Dungeon Survival Guide, and the Dungeon Master's Guide. Of course, not every encounter must begin at listed range. If two groups are parleying, when one side decides to spring an attack, the encounter range will almost certainly allow melee or missile attacks, regardless of the surrounding terrain. Affecting the ranges at which a combat encounter begins can prove critical to winning the battle. For example, if most of the heroes are archers, the group would want to limit the combat to missile range. Should the heroes wish to increase or decrease the ranges at which combat encounters begin, the scouter sentry attempts the following action. Change range. Difficulty, average 8. Action ability, perception. Opposition ability, perception. Comments. If the enemy has taken special steps to sneak up on the heroes or to avoid encountering them altogether, the narrator should increase the action's difficulty by 1 degree. Success allows the heroes to increase the range by 1 level to a maximum of visual range, or decrease it by 1 level to a minimum of melee range. Mishap. The enemy surprises the heroes, making any surprise action unnecessary before the combat begins. The heroes are not the only ones who might try to change the range at which combat begins. Their foes can attempt to alter it as well. If the heroes wish to maintain the current initial combat range in such case, the scout or sentry should attempt the action below. Maintain range. Difficulty, average 8. Opposition ability, perception. Action ability, perception. Comments. As with the previous action, this one becomes 1 degree more difficult if the enemy is trying to sneak up on the heroes or to avoid them entirely. Succeeding at this action means the heroes have effectively mirrored their foes' movements, keeping the combat range the same. Mishap. The heroes have inadvertently allowed the foe to surprise them. In addition, they lose their own chance to gain surprise before combat begins. Reading this section specifically gave me a completely different perspective about how to handle range in all Dungeons & Dragons games, not just the Saga system. And I think it's so important to realize that in most every game I've ever played, whenever you saw an enemy, you ran up, they ran up, and you clashed until one of them was the victor. Or they got to a point where they were so defeated that the survivors ran away. I never even considered the possibility in most of my games that an enemy might come across the party and not want to engage with them. I mean, you just have to be creative and realize that no, a party of goblins may not want to attack anyone. They may just be going home to eat the food they just got, or, like whatever. Not every time you run across a monster do you have to try to kill the monster. And they have the same ability of avoiding you as you have of engaging or avoiding them. I just love it, and I never really thought about it in that context before now. That may say something about how stupid my games have been, but I really appreciated this section. Avoiding surprise from the foe. Ambushing one's enemies remains a time-honored means of ensuring success in battle. While a Knight of Solamnia, or even a Dark Knight of Takhisis, would never stoop to an ambush, others are not so noble. Immediately after determining the combat scene's initial range, the narrator calls upon the scout or sentry to attempt the following action. Avoid surprise. Difficulty, average 8. Action ability, perception. Opposition ability, agility. Comments. If the enemy is attempting to sneak up on the heroes, this action becomes challenging. Success indicates that the heroes have seen or heard their attackers and may prepare to meet them. Mishap. The enemy surprises the heroes without giving them a chance to gain surprise as well. Play proceeds to actual combat exchanges. The heroes may not attempt to avoid surprise if a mishap occurs while determining the encounter's initial range. In addition, the above action is unnecessary when the enemy has no interest in surprising the heroes. Surprising the foe. If the enemy did not surprise the heroes, they perceive his approach and may decide to set up an ambush of their own. Even if the enemy did surprise them, there's a chance that both groups might surprise each other. Perhaps both parties come around a corner and bump right into each other. Of course, the heroes do not have to try to surprise the enemy, but if they wish to do so, their leader attempts the following action. Gain surprise. Difficulty, average 8. Action ability, perception. Opposition ability, agility. Cons. If the foe is wary or has taken special steps to detect an ambush, the narrator increases the action's difficulty to challenging. Success means the heroes have caught their foes unawares. Mishap. The enemy has surprised the heroes instead of the other way around. Whether or not either side surprises the other, the time has come for combat to begin in earnest. During combat. In game terms, combat is resolved through an exchange of blows. Whether one side has vanquished the other, or caused the other to flee or halt the attack, the battle comes to an end. An exchange of blows consists of the hero's attempt to hit their enemy, followed by their attempt to avoid their foe's assault. As the saga rules focus the attention of each combat scene on the actions of the heroes, whether they are attacking or defending, rather than on the character or monsters, the players stay involved at every stage of the action. This chapter describes the conventional combat only. Heroes both attempt and resist magical attacks using different abilities than listed for their actions in this section. Details on using and opposing magic appear in the next chapter. Combat sequence. Resolving an exchange of blows in combat requires several steps. The group repeats the steps below until one side emerges victorious. 1. Conduct surprise attacks if any. 2. Handle combat maneuvers. 3. Attempt hero attack actions. 4. Determine enemies' wounds. 5. Attempt counter-attack defense actions. 6. Determine heroes' wounds. 7. Resolve the battle or return to 2. Step 1. Surprise attacks. The side that won surprise, if any, has earned the right to 1 free attack or counter-attack in the case of non-heroes, before the enemy can respond. This blow can prove the deciding factor in an otherwise even battle. An initial salvo of arrows, for example, can leave an unprepared force crippled before they know what hit them. Goblins! Rah! Actually, those look like hobgoblins, maybe. When one side has achieved surprise, the narrator lets that group make an immediate attack or counterattack. After the free attack is resolved, combat proceeds as normal. Again, readers should recall that the term attack is used to define a strike by the heroes, while a counterattack indicates a blow struck by an enemy character. Thus, the surprise rule makes it possible for a counterattack to precede an attack. Step 2. Combat maneuvers. As this combat system uses abstract ranges instead of measurements like feet, yards, and so on, the narrator does not have to keep careful track of exactly where the various combatants are standing or the exact distance between any two of them. All that matters is the combat range. Before each exchange of blows, each side has an opportunity to close with or withdraw from the other force. Regardless of whether one side attempts to maneuver, it may attack normally in each exchange. The heroes maneuver. The following action details how a group of heroes closes with or pulls back from an enemy. It resembles the range adjustment action that can occur at the start of an encounter, see the before combat section, but reflects the positioning of troops during battle. For this reason, the leader, not the scout, attempts combat maneuvers. If the group splits up, the hero with the highest presence in each group may attempt the following action. Maneuver the range. Difficulty average 8, action ability agility, opposition ability agility. Comments. Maneuvering allows the heroes to move one range closer to an enemy, for instance, from near missile range to melee range, or one range further away, such as from far missile range to artillery range. Failure means the foe is matched to the hero's movement, keeping the range the same. The leader of the party attempts this action, which affects all members of the group. Mishap. The heroes find themselves unable to move closer to their enemy. In fact, the other side may opt to maneuver the range themselves, automatically pulling back or closing in on one range to thwart the hero's attempted maneuver. What's important, I think, about all of this is that this is referencing the heroes act as a group when maneuvering range. So what does this mean with an individual who wants to stay back and like lob, arrows or bolts downrange? Well, I'm not entirely sure. It comes down to the situation. If you're in a confined area, you're not going to be able to move out of combat and strike into combat, because the enemy ultimately is going to follow you. And so, these cases are going to be a little bit difficult. We also have to realize that there's not like attacks of opportunity, and there's not time for spell casting other than the time it takes for a caster to actually get all their energy together. And that comes down to spell points. And so there's a lot of like Dungeons and Dragons combat tactics issues that never arise in this. And so it gives you a little bit more freedom to play with those ideas. The enemy's maneuver. Just as heroes can attempt to maneuver toward or away from their foes, so too can the enemy jockey for position. When the foe attempts combat maneuvering, the leader of the heroes may oppose it. If he does not resist, the narrator automatically adjusts the distance between them by one range to reflect the enemy's successful maneuver. If the hero leader wants to thwart the movements of the enemy, he attempts this action: resist a maneuver. Difficulty, average 8. Action ability, agility. Opposition ability, agility. Comments. Resisting a maneuver allows the hero to thwart an enemy's attempts to move one range farther or closer. The leader of the party attempts this action, which affects all members of the group when successful. A success means the party has matched their foe's maneuvering with one of their own. Mishap. The enemy's maneuver catches the heroes so off guard, they're automatically considered surprised for the next exchange of blows. Quitting the field. When the tide of battle turns and defeat seems inevitable, most thinking creatures attempt to flee. When one side wishes to quit the field of battle, they give up any further attempt to injure their foes and flee headlong. In essence, fleeing from an enemy is nothing more than opening range. As such, heroes or characters attempting to quit the field using the change range action described earlier. Because of the single-minded nature of this flight, however, the action's difficulty falls 1 degree to easy. Once a fleeing force manages to move beyond visual range, it has escaped. Normally, escaping may require only one or more attempts to open range. If, however, the other side does not wish to pursue, escape is automatic, regardless of range. Should the attackers wish to prevent the enemy's retreat, they need only continue making change range actions to close the distance, countering the attempts to withdraw. Step 3. Hero attacks. A hero can attempt an attack action at any range of combat except visual. Unlike maneuvering, in which the leader attempts the action, attacks at most ranges are made by each hero against a foe. The type of weapon a hero can use to attack an enemy depends on the range of the encounter. At melee range, for example, fighters may exchange blows with swords, axes, or similar melee weapons. Farther away, at near or far missile range, they may rely upon missile weapons such as bows or thrown weapons like spears. Appendix 2, Arms and Armor, lists the various weapons available. Of course, magical attacks can come into play at nearly any range. See Chapter 5. When a hero wishes to attack an enemy, he attempts the attack action appropriate to the range. There are various similarities between attacks at personal and melee range, as well as between those at near and far missile range. Personal or melee attack. Difficulty, average 8. Action ability, strength. Opposition ability, endurance. Comments. Attacks at personal range consist of blows between two people, locked in a brawl or wrestling match. Such close combat can involve only natural weapons, fists, claws, fangs, and such, or very light melee weapons, daggers, etc. Melee attacks occur between individuals fighting with swords and axes and similar melee or thrown weapons. The average difficulty assumes that more or less even fight, with neither side at a disadvantage. Mishap. The hero has left himself open to a quick strike by his enemy. As such, he must immediately defend himself against a free counterattack by his foe. This attack takes place outside the normal combat sequence and does not prevent the enemy from making his normal counterattack, if he has not already done so. Missile attack. Difficulty average 8 or challenging 12. Action ability, dexterity, opposition ability, agility. Comments. A near missile attack is of average difficulty, while one at far missile range becomes challenging due to the greater distances between the heroes and the enemy. Of course, if one side has an advantage over the other in this combat scene, the narrator should alter the difficulty further. Combatants can attempt attacks at near missile range, where both thrown and missile weapons, but can only use the latter at far missile range. Mishap. The hero has inadvertently allowed a quick strike by his enemy and must immediately defend himself against a free attack, which takes place outside the normal combat sequence. In addition to the free attack, the enemy also makes his normal counterattack. And just a reminder, mishaps only occur when the player tries to use a dragon suit card and fails. That's when the mishap occurs. Artillery attack. Difficulty, average 8. Action ability, dexterity. Opposition ability, agility. Comments. An attack at the widest combat range assumes that the heroes are firing artillery at a group of enemies or a large target, not at a specific individual or small targets. If the artillerist wants to attempt a more exact attack, the difficulty increases. Artillery weapons include such massive arms as catapults and bombards. Mishap. The attacker's weapon malfunctions, requiring repair before he can use it again. The narrator should use base difficulty for the repair action and the time it takes, or on the value of the dragon's card responsible for the mishap. A low card indicates a minor mishap easily fixable in 4 or 5 minutes, while a high card implies severe damage, which will require hours to remedy. Step 4. Determine enemy's wounds. A successful attack means a hero has defied his enemy's resistance, dodge attempts, and the other factors represented by the action's opposition value. Whether he was able to wound his enemy and the severity of that resulting injury depends on 2 factors. The first of these is the weapon itself. Obviously, all else being equal, it hurts a whole lot more to be hit by a battle axe or a warhammer than it does to be poked with a kitchen knife. The Arms and Armor table in Appendix 2 offers a damage rating for each type of weapon, which indicates relative lethality. The other aspect governing the severity of a wound is the attacking character's strength for melee weapons or agility for thrown or missile weapons or artillery. Again, all things being equal, it hurts a character much more than a burly warrior hits him than a scrawny sorcerer connects. At this time, players calculate the amount of damage they have inflicted upon their enemies. However, the penalties from these wounds are not actually applied until after the counter-attack step to allow for the enemy's simultaneous attacks. This is important because this is very advanced Dungeons & Dragons here. You are attacking and defending in the exact same instance. At no point, and you're just jockeying around in whatever range that you're in. So if you're in melee range or personal range, you're constantly maneuvering, trying to get your jabs in while trying to defend from the other person's jabs. This creates a situation where you cannot fire into melee unless you want to hit your friend, possibly, in Advanced Dungeons & Dragons terms. Because you're not just standing in one square on a battle map in 4th or 3rd edition, for example. Damage points. Players rate the severity of a wound in damage points. The more damage points an attack inflicts, the deadlier it is. Given attack causes a number of potential damage points equal to the attacker's strength score, or agility in the case of a thrown or missile weapons or artillery, plus the damage rating of the weapon itself. In the case of fisticuffs and hand wrestling, when the combatants use no weapons, the attacker inflicts potential damage points equal to the attacker's strength score alone. For example, say the mighty warrior Kalen has engaged in with a mercenary in battle. Kalen attacks with a scimitar and achieves an action score high enough to land a blow. The potential damage from this action equals Kalen's strength score 7, plus the damage rating of the scimitar, plus 5. Thus, Kalen's flashing blade inflicts a total of 12 potential damage points wherever it hits. Armor and shields. The previous section uses the phrase potential damage points because many characters and some monsters wear armor and employ shields to protect themselves from attack damage. In game terms, these items offer protection by reducing the number of damage points an attack inflicts. Just as a weapon has a damage rating, a shield or suit of armor has a defense rating, also listed in Appendix 2. Say that Kalen takes up battle with a mercenary warrior, inflicting 12 potential damage points on his foe. Unfortunately for Kalen, this character wears chainmail armor with a defense rating of -3 and carries a kite shield with a defense rating of -2. Thus, the mercenary's armor and shield block 5 potential damage points, leaving him to suffer only 7 actual damage points in the end. A shield or suit of armor's defense rating wards a number of damage points equal to its defense rating per attack. So if Kalen and the companion had faced the mercenary in the last exchange, each inflicting 12 damage points upon him, that character's total defense rating of -5 applies to each blow, leaving him to suffer 2 7-point wounds. In most cases, both armor and shields offer protection from any type of conventional non-magical attack. At personal range, however, shields become ineffective. They cannot come into play in such a tight range. This is really important because it goes both ways. You know, I mean, you're going to be protected in the same way that they are protected from damage. Record keeping. Once players and the narrators determine the number of damage points from the hero's attacks that actually penetrate the target's armor and shields, they should note the injuries for reference after the counterattack phase below. Despite any injuries the hero inflicts in the exchange of blows, the foes conduct their simultaneous counterattack before technically suffering the damage points. Step 5.
Here's what I found.
Oh my gosh, shut up, Siri. Step 5. Enemy counterattacks. For the purpose of this discussion, a counterattack is assumed to be an attack by creatures or other characters on the heroes and their allies. In order to keep the focus of the game on the heroes and their actions, players and narrators resolve counterattacks as the heroes attempt to defend against enemy assaults. Thus, the narrator never attempts a counterattack action for the enemies to see whether they hit their targets. Should the hero successfully defend himself, the counterattack misses. If not, the counterattack has found its mark. As with attacks, each hero in combat makes his own attempt to avoid damage from a counterattack. The narrator uses his judgment to determine the foe's targets. If the enemies are outnumbered, some heroes may not need to defend themselves at all. The foes, like heroes, can usually attack only one time at a target. The nature of counterattack defense actions depends on the current combat range. Personal or melee defense. Difficulty, average 8. Action ability, endurance. Opposition ability, strength. Commons. A hero attempts a personal defense action to protect himself from a foe's natural weapons, fists, claws, fangs, and such, or very light melee weapons, daggers, etc., in a brawl or wrestling match. Shields prove too bulky to provide any defense at personal range, although armor functions normally. Melee defense actions involve the hero resisting melee and thrown weapons, such as swords and axes. Shields and armor provide their normal defense. If the two combatants are not evenly matched, the narrator should adjust the action's difficulty accordingly. Mishap. The hero has left himself vulnerable to a quick strike by his enemy. As such, he must immediately defend himself against a second counterattack, which takes place outside the normal combat sequence. Missile defense. Difficulty, average 8 or easy 4. Action ability, agility. Opposing ability, dexterity. Commons. Due to the greater distance between combatants, defending oneself at far missile range is easier than at near missile range. Aiming blows at this distance becomes harder for the enemy, just as it would for the hero. The narrator should also adjust the action's difficulty if one side in this exchange is the other at a disadvantage. Heroes may find themselves forced to defend against either thrown or missile weapons at near missile range. However, enemies at far missile range can use only the latter. Thrown weapons would fall short. Mishap. The enemy has gotten into a quick strike against the hero, forcing him to immediately defend himself against a free counterattack outside the normal combat sequence. Artillery defense. Difficulty average 8. Action ability agility. Opposition ability dexterity. Commons. The average action difficulty assumes that the enemy is firing artillery at a group of enemies or a large target, not at an individual or small target. Thus, the defense action becomes easy when the artillerists seek to pinpoint a more exact target. Mishap. The hero has opened himself up to a quick strike by his enemy and must defend himself immediately against another counterattack. This counterattack takes place outside the normal combat sequence. Step 6. Determine hero's wounds. Players determine the wounds their heroes receive in damage points, exactly as they resolve the damage their heroes inflicted earlier. Everyone should note this damage for reference during the next phase of combat. Step 7. Resolution of battle. After players have determined how much their heroes have wounded their enemies, as well as the extent of their own wounds, they must determine how much these injuries have affected the combatants. Hero's injuries. A hero's wounds forces player to lose some of the cards in his Hand of Fate. The player cannot replace these cards by drawing until the hero's wounds have healed. Those with wounded heroes must play with fewer cards than usual. The player of a wounded hero must give up cards with a total value equal or greater than the number of damage points the hero sustained. The reduction in cards reflects the effects of the injury on the hero. For example, say the valiant Kalen has suffered 8 damage points after applying defense ratings for his shield and armor. If he had 8 cards in his hand, he could discard it and end the process right there, playing with 1 less card until his wound was healed. By the same token, he might be forced to discard 2 cards, say a 5 and a 3, to meet this requirement. That would put him 2 cards down until he regains full health. Should the player find himself forced to give up more points than the actual value of the wound, he doesn't get new cards as change. In the example, if Kalen's player had to give up 2 5 cards to satisfy his 8-point wound, he would simply lose the extra points. When a player gives up his last card, his hero is assumed to have fallen unconscious. Any subsequent attack will kill the hero. Only the healing magic of the mystics can save a hero attacked while unconscious. See Chapter 5. The wounding trump rule. One should never overlook the power of a hero's physical stamina and the mental determination to help him resist the effects of a battle injury. Therefore, the suite of helms and hearts, which represent endurance and spirit, are considered trump suites in resolving heroes' wounds. Whenever a player uses any Helms or Hearts card to account for his hero's injury, he can flip the top card of the Fate deck and apply its value to that of the one he just played. For example, say Kalen suffered 24 damage points in an exchange of blows. Such a devastating blow might ordinarily leave him crippled for an extended period of play. However, Kalen's player has a pair of trump in his hands. He plays the first, the One of Helms, flipping the top card of the Fate deck to reveal a 7 of Swords. He has 1 point card now, wards off 8 of Kalen's 24 damage points. He next plays his 3 of Hearts, turning over the 5 of Helms from the deck. Because this is also a trump suite, he turns yet another card, revealing the 5 of Orbs. All told, Kalen's player has discarded only 4 points from his hand, and yet has managed to account for 21 damage. Point through the use of trump. He now discards a 3rd card from his hand to settle his remaining 3 damage points, and play continues. Wounding mishaps. The Suite of Dragons represents a mishap the way the Suite of Swords symbolizes strength. Therefore, using a Dragon's card to satisfy the requirements of an injury tells the player that his hero has suffered a particularly severe blow. For the duration of the battle, players must consider this hero as fighting to remain conscious. All of his ability scores fall 1 point during this period. Additional wounding mishaps can reduce the hero's ability scores further at the narrator's discretion. After combat, the hero regains his lost points at a rate of 1 point in each ability per 15 minutes of game time. Character and creature injuries. As no one holds a Hand of Fate for characters and creatures, the method for applying combat damage to them differs slightly from the hero damage assessment. It's even a little simpler. The narrator assumes that each character or creature can sustain a number of damage points equal to his endurance or physique score before being rendered unconscious. When the total number of damage points inflicted on a character, cumulative, has reduced his endurance score to 0 or less, he falls unconscious. Any subsequent attack will kill him. This system applies even if the character or creature has fought as the hero's ally. Other actions during combat. Of course, there is often more to combat than simply 2 people hitting each other with swords or exchanging volleys of arrows. This becomes especially true when a narrator is blessed with especially imaginative players. Suppose that Kalen, facing a draconian, decides he's clearly outmatched. Therefore, he chooses not to attack the creature with a scimitar, but attempts to knock it down and flee into the night. How does this work? In most cases, anything the player wants their heroes to do in combat can be resolved fairly easily as routine actions. See Creating an Action in Chapter 3. However, the narrator must remember two key factors before assigning difficulty to such actions. Creating a combat action. First, he should remember the overall nature of any battle. Combat is generally a very confusing and fast-paced environment. Something a narrator might term an easy action at other times might well prove an average or even challenging one in the midst of combat. This fact becomes especially true in melee or personal combat, or with very delicate work. Picking a lock, for example, seems much harder if a hero has to worry about being hit in the back by an arrow or a wild swing. The narrator also should remember, when resolving other combat actions, to emphasize that they should not be too complex and that they have to happen fast. In most cases, an exchange of blows lasts just a minute. A hero can do only so much in just 60 seconds. These two considerations clearly limit the sorts of activities a hero can attempt during combat. Below is the list of actions common to combat situations. It should give narrators an idea of what heroes can and can't do during a minute or so of battle. The narrator must decide whether the action succeeds automatically or else determine its difficulty and its action and opposition abilities based on the circumstances. Change weapons. A hero returns his current weapon to his sheath or drops it and readies another. Ready an item for use. If a hero can reach the object in question fairly easily, if it's not buried at the bottom of a loaded backpack, he can retrieve it and ready it during the space of one combat exchange. Hard to get at items might take longer than 1 minute to ready. Use an item of magic. Heroes can use most magical items once per minute instead of making a normal attack. Of course, some items may prove difficult to employ, while others, like enchanted swords, are always functioning. They don't require the hero to take time to activate them. Breaking down a door. Or else, hold on, I want to go back to use a magic item. As far as time goes, using a magic sword doesn't really matter, but there's some fun in role-playing that you can always use. Like, maybe in order for your Holy Avenger to flame with divine light, you have to call out your deity or something. It doesn't actually take any effort, and you could just run a regular attack. But if during the, resolving the attack action, you're, as the character, are, creating the atmosphere of what you're doing, I call out to my deity, Paladine, strike this beast down! And I swing down, with divine might. It just makes it a little more interesting and colorful for those waiting for their turn or for the narrator, so that it actually spurs others to act accordingly when they play. And this creates a much more interesting scene, especially if, for example, you're live streaming the event. So, just think about that when you're playing. Break down a door. A hero who succeeds at this action mentioned in the last chapter takes a minute to break down a door. Should the action fail, the hero still spend a minute throwing his shoulder against the door before giving up. Something else? Other actions are possible during combat, of course. The narrator should use the above ideas as guidelines to decide what a hero can accomplish in 1 minute. Each of these actions forces a hero to skip an attack. Therefore, he still may defend himself normally from counterattacks. If an attack seems especially tricky, the narrator can rule the hero will have a harder time protecting himself from counterattacks, increasing the difficulty of defense actions by 1 or even 2 degrees. Special combat situations. Combat doesn't always go according to plan. Sometimes events occur in the heat of battle that pit two heroes against each other. Perhaps one of them has fallen under an evil spell that allows an outsider force to dictate his actions, or aggression might spring up between two characters who stage a duel to decide the better swordsman. Hero versus hero combat. Whether the fight is accidental or intentional, a hero involved in a fight against another hero should attempt his normal combat actions. And I think it's important to clarify here. Characters are NPCs. Heroes are PCs. So this is you fighting against another person at the table. However, if surprise is a possibility, neither hero should bother with the action to gain surprise. Instead, both should attempt to avoid being surprised. Should one fail, he is surprised. If both fail or both succeed, combat continues normally. Narrators should handle the ensuing battle in the simplest way. Each hero attempts a normal attack action followed by a counterattack defense action. This sequence actually illustrates 2 combat exchanges, as each hero gets a chance to strike his opponent both as the attacker and as the counterattacker. Afterward, both heroes resolve their wounds normally. Character versus character combat. So this is NPC versus NPC. The guidelines offered in the Character Actions section of Chapter 3 apply to combat actions as well. After combat. The battle finally ends. One group of combatants has vanquished the other. Before the adventure continues with the next scene, the players and narrator must tie up a few loose ends. The coup de grace. At the end of a battle, the winning side may opt to go about the field of battle administering killing blows to foes who have been merely knocked out. Because remember, no matter what, once you run out of hands in your hand of fate, or whether the enemy runs out of endurance, they're not killed, they're just unconscious. Of course, such behavior is not the sort of thing heroes, or even honorable villains, would do. If the fallen happen to be dangerous beasts or monsters, however, the heroes may consider the coup de grace essential to protecting their backs later in the adventure. Narrators should note that villains, even evil ones, do not automatically kill their opponents after a battle. Many less intelligent foes simply don't think of it, while others depart hurriedly after battle in a rush to accomplish their next goal. Thus, even if all the heroes fall in battle, chances are victors will simply leave them for dead. Healing and first aid. Mystic healing, covered in the next chapter, can greatly increase the rate at which a hero or character recovers. However, even without the aid of magic, heroes can offer basic medical care to the wounded immediately after a battle, using the following action. Offer first aid. Difficulty, average 8, action ability, dexterity, opposition ability, none. Comments. Successfully offering first aid requires 1 card to the hand of a player with an injured hero. If this card restores the player's hand of fate to its normal size, his hero has been fully healed. Those who are still short a card or more require more medical attention or must let time work its wonders. A hero can give first aid to himself as above or to a character, the latter by flipping over the top card of the fate deck and restoring it to the character a number of points equal to its value. However, wait, what? Can give first aid to a character. Oh, the character being not a PC, an NPC. Right? Yeah. That's a little confusing. Because that seems like they're... Well, this is saying if the card restores the player's hand of fate to its normal size, the hero has been fully healed. But if it's a character, so the character is an NPC. Okay. By flipping over the fate deck and restoring the character the number of points equal to its value. Okay. However, one can receive only a single attempt at first aid immediately following a fight in which he has lost at least 1 card or suffered any damage in the case of the characters. Mishap. The healer has actually made a wound worse, forcing the hero to discard his lowest card just as if he had been injured anew. That would suck. This section's almost done. I'm going to stop after it. My voice is like leaving me. Natural healing. The process of healing from severe battle injuries can be slow and tedious, so most adventuring parties depend upon the skill of a mystic to keep them healthy. Sometimes, however, magical healing is not available and heroes or characters must resist, relying on nature to stitch their wounds. Natural healing occurs at a rate of 1 card per week of rest and relative inactivity. If an individual stays confined to bed and undertakes no stressful actions, he automatically regains 1 lost card at the week's end. Should the hero be forced to undertake moderate activities such as travel, his body might not be able to heal itself. To determine if such a hero heals successfully, his player flips the top card on the fate deck at the end of the week. If this card is equal to or less than his endurance score, or if it is from the suite of helms, the hero has healed and may replace 1 lost card. A hero forced to undertake any form of major physical activity, including combat, more than once or twice during the course of the week, cannot benefit from natural healing. The only way that such an adventurer will recover fully from his wounds is through the auspices of mysticism. I love this because it reminds me once again of Advanced Dungeons and Dragons, where you recover like 1 hit point a day at bed rest. Like this tells you how challenging combat can be. If you only have 4 or 5 cards in your hand and you have to lose 2 of them, I mean, you're down to 3 or 2. Like that's terrible. You know, what if you had 2 1s? You're just stuck with 2 1s until you do something. Sucks. Spoils of victory. Heroes might seek to loot the bodies of their fallen enemies. In some cases, taking such spoils of victory is acceptable. When the enemies are nothing more than monsters or honorless thugs, if the fallen heroes clearly used valuable items of magic, or when the heroes believe their foes held information or objects that could help them reach their goals. If, however, players seem tempted to go too far, the narrator must step in with some guidance. For instance, most honorable heroes, especially knights, should refuse to loot the bodies of the fallen, particularly in the case of an enemy who fought well and with honor of his own. Such characters deserve as fine a funeral as can be arranged under the current circumstances. After all, even the Dark Knight Steel Brightblade personally returned the bodies of the young Solemnic Knights Tannen and Sturm Magir to their parents for burial and recited the prayer for the dead at the gravesite. It is also considered somewhat less than heroic to loot the bodies of one's own comrades out of mere greed. Anyone who has fought beside you deserves the respect shown by a decent funeral. Of course, players will inevitably find gray areas in matters of spoils. In all cases, the players must let their hero's nature and demeanor guide them, with the narrator always having the final say. And that is the end of this session. Hoy vey. Okay, thank you guys so much for tuning in. I love revisiting this stuff. When I read it to myself, I just sort of like burn through it in my head. But reading it aloud really gets those nuances like ingrained in me, so that when it is time to make a ruling, it's easier for me to recall if I've read it aloud than if I just read it to myself. I don't know why, but it just does. And I appreciate all your time and attention. I know this isn't the most exciting stuff, but if this is the first time you're exposed to Saga System, it's invaluable because you got to know how the game works. So, with the players in the game that we're going to be playing on Saturday, I have not overtly given them any real rules or given them even the book if they don't own it themselves. So it is going to be a situation of introduction to the game systems. And so maybe the first session or the first part of the first session is going to be a little bit slower as we sort of work out the kinks, so to speak. But it'll speed up. There's going to be 4 of these adventures ultimately to complete the mini campaign that I have planned. So, if you want to see this game played, you are welcome to join us in the chat and, comment on it and throw out ideas and thoughts for the players to sort of soak in at their own discretion. It should be a good time, and you're definitely welcome to join. But that is it for this episode of Gaming Saga System. What do you think of the Saga gaming system? Is its focus on the hero and story worth the change in game mechanics? And would you ever run a Saga System game? Feel free to email me at info@dlsaga.com or leave a comment below. I would like to take a moment and remind you to subscribe to this YouTube channel, ring that bell to get notified about upcoming videos, and click the like button. This all goes to help other Dragonlance fans learn about this channel and its content. This channel is all about celebrating the wonderful world of the DragonLance Saga, and I hope you thank you for joining me in the celebration. Thank you for watching. This has been Adam with DragonLance Saga. Until next time, Slanjavar.